I forgot to open up the iPad. Do you want me to open that up if you need? It's okay? All right. Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday service. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Mritam Gamaya Aviravirmaedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, O Lord, and protect us evermore from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrotha Va Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Buddhota Siddhota Va Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahita Sattvanukampodyato Yasarvai Sahasamskrito Gunaganais Tasmai Namah Sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings, and is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om Peace, Peace, Peace be unto us all. So this morning is question and answer, which means the onus is on you, you to come up with my talk. But there's not much pressure on you today because, as usual, I've gotten in advance several good questions, in fact 5, which will certainly take up the time. Because I first want to address a topic of my own before we begin the question and answers. And that is because last Sunday, I gave a talk on Thanksgiving. And it didn't come out, the recording didn't come out because of a break in the internet. And I decided not to try to repost a recording of it because I wasn't satisfied with the talk. And in particular, what I said near the beginning of the talk in the introductory remarks. And so I wanted to redo those to clarify what it was I said. So those of you who didn't hear the talk, just take it as a fresh topic. And those of you who did take it, did hear the talk, it is not a correction, but I want to explain what it is that I meant because I didn't do a good job of it. I was trying to say something without saying too much, and as often happens, that ends up with not saying enough to make it clear what you mean, and because it is a sensitive topic, one could easily misconstrue what I said, and so that's what I want to avoid. So I began the talk last week on Thanksgiving, talking about the first Thanksgiving, and I said how it began with the well-known story, which is a true story, there are records of it, of the first Thanksgiving in the winter of 1620, when the pilgrims who had come to Massachusetts, what now is Massachusetts, were celebrating their first harvest after a very difficult winter that they had passed. They came the previous fall, passed a very difficult winter when half of the people who had come from England, half of them died over the winter. both the pilgrims themselves and the crew of the ship who had brought them. Half of them died. And they didn't know how to survive in the new country. And some of the Native Americans of the area, they helped them. They taught them how to harvest local berries and grains and so forth, how to fish and plant. So celebrating their first harvest season, they had prepared what was for them a feast. It wouldn't be a feast for many people now because, of course, they were scrounging just to survive. But they had plenty of fowl and deer and so forth. And then some Native Americans, 90 Native Americans, came to join them to celebrate the feast and the harvest, and brought food themselves. And so for 3 days they had a feast. So I mentioned that it was half a century later, in 1675, when the two were at war with one another. The colonists, the European colonists, they wanted to expand and they wanted to take over the Native American territory. That led to war, and thousands of Native Americans were killed. The very people who had helped them get established, who had unlike in other parts of the country, those who had welcomed them and tried to help them, now they were on the receiving end of expansionist violence. And so, as I said last week, this shows one of the contradictions at the heart of America. And as I said then, it's a contradiction that comes down to our present day. And so now I get to the part that I want to correct, and that is, not correct, but explain what it was that I meant so that it doesn't give the wrong impression. I said that that has come down to us today, and we see it even today in the present conflicts, very public conflicts in the country. For instance, the conflicts over control of school boards and so forth. And I said that there are there are good points on both sides. So that's what I want to clarify, because what I did not mean is that not teaching children in an age-appropriate way about the real history of the country, about slavery, about the struggle for abolition of slavery, the condition of the Native Americans, and they're being pushed further and further west, and the broken treaties and so forth. No, there's not a good excuse for teaching a false history, denying all of that, so that we can be proud that we are the perfect country, we are great Americans, we are an exceptional country, everything here is virtuous, and we do everything in the right way. No, we're human beings. It's a struggle for all human beings between doing that which should be done and should not be done. Kartavya and akartavya. That which is karya, that which should be done, a duty, and that which is the opposite of it. That's the human condition. And so the history certainly should be, a true history should be presented. And of course, there's no such thing as perfect objectivity, but we approximate objectivity. If we don't even try to approximate it, then we are spinning out tales which are obviously inaccurate. And so the true history needs to be taught. But what I meant by there are arguments on both sides is that the effort to correct the record can go too far. They can go too far. It can go so far that it begins to demonize everybody on the other side. And that is not good. And so I'll give some examples of what I mean by that. Whenever there is a moral argument, each side tries to be the good guy, the guy with the white hat, and correspondingly, they try to put the black hat on the other side of the argument, the demonizing the other side, so that we're all good and they are all bad. And that you see on both sides of the present argument. So I don't condone at all the effort to push out education board members across the country because you don't like them teaching, or they don't like what is being taught in the schools, the intimidating of people, the threatening of violence to people, the stalking of people, the listing people's addresses so that other people can go and stalk them, the threats of violence, etc. That there's no excuse for that. But what there also should not be, again, is the demonization of everyone on everyone that is perceived not in tune with the present day ideas of virtue. Because history changes, attitudes change, expectations in society change. We can be sure that 100 years from now, 200 years from now, many of the things that we take for granted, people at that time will say, how could those idiots do such a thing? They knew better. They knew better, and still they were doing what they're doing. They were destroying the world. How could they do this? And demonizing the present generation. So those who today are demonizing past generations will be the objects of the same process in the future. So we have to recognize the human condition. That again, there is the struggle for doing that which is right, which is always a struggle. It's hard. We should know what is right and what is wrong. I'm not talking about confusing what is right and what is wrong, but some details of what we consider right and wrong, that changes with historical circumstances. Today, if somebody tried to take over America as a king and set himself as a king or a dictator of the country, we would be rightfully horrified. But 2 centuries ago, that's what everybody did. That was the expected thing. And so again, that doesn't mean that somebody doing it now, because now society has changed. We've seen another way to do things. There's the expectation of democracy and the rightful expectation of democracy. And so we would be horrified at somebody doing it. But that doesn't mean that all previous societies were evil because they had kings and queens. No, it doesn't mean that. Just the other day, they took down a statue in New York City of Thomas Jefferson. And so it starts with taking down Confederate monuments, which I can understand. I grew up in the Deep South, and I know the history of the Deep South. I grew up in the bad old days of segregation, and thank God those are over. And I agree that the statues of Confederate soldiers should be removed from public view. Not because all of them were evil. No, they were fighting for that which they understood to be right. Some of them were bad people. Some of them were good people who had a different view of the functioning of society. And that idea of the functioning of society is not acceptable today. I don't accept it, you don't accept it. And so the honoring of the Confederacy, that is a mistake. Even people like Robert E. Lee, who is the most famous of the Confederate leaders, not a political leader, but a military leader, he was opposed to putting up monuments to the Confederacy, erecting statues to people like himself, because he said that the South had lost and that there was time for reconciliation and rejoining the Union and putting old enmity aside. And so such things are good, but as people were asking when Confederate statues were being removed, well, how far do we go? So yes, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. That's not acceptable. We know the evil of slavery, and those who apologize for it, no, that's not acceptable either, because we know that the horrors of slavery. There's not a good excuse for it. However, as Swami Vivekananda said, you judge an apple tree by its good fruit. If an apple tree, if 2 apple trees have 3 rotten fruits, and one apple tree has nothing else but 3 rotten fruits, but the other tree has 50 bushels of beautiful apples and 3 rotten ones, then you don't cut down the apple tree that had 3 rotten apples but produced 50 bushels of beautiful apples. And so to only see Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, people who have been heroes to the people of this country for a couple of hundred years, more than a couple of hundred years, and to see them only as slaveholders. Yes, slaveholding, we don't want anything to do with it. That is not right. And we can teach, people should know that that was part of the society at that time. We now rightfully think it to be wrong, but it was part of the society. But to see them only as slaveholders, that's a mistake. There's not anyone that is proud of everything that they've ever done, every aspect of their life. There's no one. And so if we're going to demonize people on one particular point, then you're going to find that there's no one in the world that is safe. You can even look at the great saints of the world, if you want, and find something that you don't like about them. And say, oh, Saint Teresa of Avila, she did this, and we're going to pull down all of the statues of Saint Teresa of Avila. Well, such a great saint. Sri Ramakrishna said that women should be modest. And today the attitude is that women should be free. They should be able to express themselves and so forth. So we're going to tear down all of the pictures of Sri Ramakrishna because he said to Holy Mother that the virtue of women is in modesty. No, we can do that with anybody. And so that was what I meant when I said that there are arguments on both sides. When we demonize a whole people, which is what is done when we demonize our own past, and we can't see the beauty of the ideals that were presented by the founders of this country. The beauty and the far-reaching power of their ideas. We can't go to Montebello of Thomas Jefferson and see the genius of the man and the goodness of the man. Yes, we should know that he had slaves. He had children by those slaves, and he didn't free them when he passed away. But we also should know and admit that he himself was terribly conflicted all of his life because of that. He actually wanted to put into the Constitution a ban on slavery, but he was never able to live up to his own ideal in that regard. But how many of us live up to our own highest ideal? Who does? And so to take figures like that and say, this is what he was because he did something bad, no, and blind ourselves to all of the great genius that he did. So that was what I meant, that this contradiction between a country that was founded like the Pilgrims, they came here for religious freedom, but they in turn tried to deny religious freedom to everybody else. That's why Roger Williams left the Massachusetts colony of the Pilgrims and went to Rhode Island to found a new colony where there would be full religious freedom, not just for Christians, but for Jews and others as well, and for non-believers as well. He was a religious man, but he believed in religious liberty. And so to see that there's this evolving ideal, and not to let go of the ideal, and not to look on those who tried the best that they could. Look on them as demonic because they did something, some aspect of their life doesn't measure up to our present day standards. So that is what I meant, not that all of the things that are going on now with the school boards and the attempt to restrict people's voting. No, there's no excuse for that, and that should be fought. But fighting a unjust tendency is one thing, and demonizing a whole people or a whole era of people, that's a different thing. Because again, we will be in the same boat in 100 years or 200 years. So now let me get to questions and answers. Again, we got 5 very good questions this time. And so let me begin with the 2 that were posted on the internet on our YouTube channel. One is a technical question, which a good question, but one that's fairly easy to address. How does the Atman relate to the gross, subtle, and astral bodies? Are they all illusory? Are these all of the bodies illusory? So first, let me say, the gross body means, using Vedantic terminology, the gross body is the physical body that we see and feel. The subtle body is the mental body. It's not just the mind, all of the aspects of the mind, including the memory and the buddhi, the highest part of the mind. It also includes the prana, that is the vital force, which we don't yet have a concept of in the West. There have been thinkers who had concepts of it, but it hasn't made it into scientific thinking. But it is an observable body, observable through higher meditation. So it is an experiential fact, even if scientists can't measure it with their physical instruments yet. So the subtle body includes the mind in all of its aspects, the prana, that is the vital force, that which makes the energy which makes the body function and the mind function, and also the powers of the senses. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin, those are the external receptors of sense impressions. But according to Vedanta, there's the internal mental power of seeing and hearing and smelling, tasting and touching. And so that internal power to perceive through the senses, that also is part of the subtle body. Evidence that there is a separation between these organs, the physical organs in the physical body, and the powers which are not physical, is seen in plentiful, in various ways, but the most acceptable way for the scientific mind to see it is in clinical studies of near-death experiences, where a person is clinically dead, seen to be flatlined by the doctor, sometimes in an operating room, and the person experiences, the person who has experienced clinical death, they experience themselves leaving the body. And I've known people who have had this experience. It's not that uncommon. They experience themselves leaving the body, and sometimes they hover in the operating room and look down and see what's being done to revive them. And when they're revived, they tell the doctors and nurses what it was that they saw. And it's been reported many times, analyzed scientifically, recorded scientifically, that there was no way that the person lying here could have seen and heard what was going on in the operating room. Heard, yes, if the ears were functioning, but there was no brain activity registering. But seeing, no, because they were seeing from an angle which the eyes here, even if they were functioning, would not have seen. And so that shows that we have the powers to sense which are independent of the physical receptors. Normally, just as an electric current goes through wires, or for the Ethernet cables, the internet, the signal for the internet travels along a wire, but you can send it wirelessly also. You can get outside of the network of wiring through wireless transmission. And so in a similar way, not exact the same, of course, but in a similar way, metaphorically or allegorically similar, the mind and senses at present work through the physical body, but they can be separated from it. And so that's the subtle body. And the astral body, actually, the astral body is a Western term. It's not a Vedantic term. And astral body usually is what is meant by the subtle body. So astral body and subtle body are the same. The third body in Vedanta is called the causal body. So I won't go into all of the detail of that, but the causal body is the deepest, most primordial part of our phenomenal being. According to Vedanta, we are the Atman, the pure spirit, pure consciousness, which is the witness of the body and mind. And that pure self, which we are, the infinite self, which we are, is reflected in the mind. And through the mind, it's reflected into the body or through the nerves and so forth, so that the body itself seems to be conscious. But according to Vedanta, the consciousness does not belong to the body. It doesn't even belong to the mind. It belongs to the self. And it's only the reflected light of that which makes the body and mind appear conscious. And so when a person dies, the consciousness is separated from the body, and together with the subtle body, it travels to a different plane of existence. So, and the causal body is the body which we experience in deep dreamless sleep. When the mind is not functioning, the ego is not functioning, there are no thoughts, there are no concepts, there's just the perception of nothingness. But there is perception, but perception of nothingness. We wake up from deep sleep and say, oh, I slept so profoundly, I didn't know anything. I was just completely zonked out. I didn't know anything. We do know something. We know that I don't know anything. That's how we say when we wake up from deep sleep that, oh my God, it was so wonderful. I was so fast asleep. I didn't know anything. It was wonderful. So we know that we didn't know anything, and we know that it was wonderful. So the experience there is the experience of joy, the freedom from all thought, and the perception of primordial ignorance, that which makes us forget who we really are. So the Atman, yes, is separate from all of those. The Atman, the true self, is pure consciousness, that which never goes to sleep, that which witnesses this, makes us conscious here. It's that when we dream, we're conscious of the dream world, and in deep sleep, we're conscious of darkness, of absence, but we are conscious of it. We're not thinking about it, so we don't have memories that, oh, I thought about this when I was there, and then I thought about that, and then I felt this and I felt that. No, there's no feeling, there's no thinking, just the perception of the absence of everything. And because the mind and its memories depend on activity, we experience that as a pure blank, as a pure absence. But it is actual perception. So the self is never asleep. It's always awake. And so that's separate from all of these. So finally, are they all illusory? The the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. From the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualistic Vedanta, according to Shankara, traditional non-dualism, yes, they're all illusory because they're all part of this. And Advaita Vedanta says that the definition of reality is that which can never be negated. It always is and can never be negated. But we negate this every day when we go to sleep. We negate it when we're unconscious. We negate it when we're in deep meditation and the world disappears, the body disappears. And so Vedanta says that that which can never be negated is their definition of reality. And since the self can never be negated, it's present in waking, it's present in dreaming, it's present in deep sleep, it's present in unconsciousness, and it's present alone in its full glory in samadhi, in the highest experience. And so that is the definition of reality according to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. Other schools of Vedanta say that, well, that's just because you've defined reality that way. But if you look on this whole universe as the play of God, the dance of Shiva, the dance of Kali, the play of Sri Krishna, etc., then as the play of God, it's real. And so in that sense, this body, even though it's impermanent, changing every moment, and therefore unreal according to Vedanta's definition, according to the devotional schools, why say it's unreal? It's temporary, yes. It's impermanent, yes. But it's part of the play of the Divine Mother. And so no need to call it unreal. So Sri Ramakrishna said, if we experience the body, then we can't deny that experience. We're aware of this, we're aware of this, we have to deal with it. I can say all day that my body doesn't exist, and I still have to feed it, I still have to bathe it, I still have to clothe it, I still have to exercise it. And so Sri Ramakrishna said let me put it this way. I think the meaning of Sri Ramakrishna's instruction is that when you experience the body, you can't say, oh, I have no body. What he means is that we can't live a hypocritical life. We have to deal with that which we are experiencing. If we're experiencing the body, we have to deal with it. And so the spiritual way to deal with the body is either the devotional way to see that this is an instrument given by God and used in the service of God, or from the Vedantic, non-dualistic Vedantic perspective, to see the body as an object of my perception. I'm conscious of the body, but I, being conscious of the body, I'm not the body, but the body is there. I'm conscious of it, but I'm the witness, the sakshi, the witness of the body. So yes, from a Advaitic perspective, it's unreal. From a devotional experience perspective, I mean, there's no reason to say it's unreal. It's just part of the play of God. And so this whole universe is the play of the divine. And so in that sense, we need not deny the reality of experience. So the other internet question, how do I overcome panicky thoughts? Loops of negative thoughts and the fear of death. Yes, loops of negative thoughts, using computer terminology of a computer loop, where the computer gets into an endless loop where it can't get out of it. And so that's something that all of us experience, where there are negative thoughts that we have that we just can't find our way out of. They just keep coming back to us. And that's something everybody struggles with. And panicky thoughts. Some people have regular panicky thoughts. Other people, it's an occasional problem. But it is something that everyone has some experience. Some people have a lot of experience, daily experience, and some people have occasional experience of panicky thoughts. And fear of death, as Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras, that is present even in the wise. And that it comes from birth to birth. All creatures you see have the fear of death, even an amoeba, even an ant, another insects, plants have the fear of death. Everything has the fear. Everything living has the fear of death. So how to overcome the negative thoughts, panicky thoughts, and the fear of death? So first, with the fear of death, taking that first, because the fear of death is the most basic. All fear is tied to the primordial fear of death. Whenever we have fear of anything, it can be seen to be tied to the fear of annihilation. The fear of harm, yes, but that also is tied to the fear of annihilation. That again is inborn. It's there in an infant. It's there in a newly hatched duckling that's on its first walk to water. So the fear of death is best overcome by confronting it directly, by facing the fact of death. Now, for some people, that's too direct. The fear of death is so much that, no, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to hear about it. It sets up panic as soon as the idea of death comes. And so we try to hide from it. And that, of course, in the West, we have perfected the ability to hide from it. It wasn't always that way here, because when society was more primitive, so many people were dying and you couldn't hide from it. But nowadays, death is pushed away so far that people are protected from death, from confronting death. So if one can, one should learn to confront the idea of death boldly, not fearfully, but just to talk to oneself. And I don't mean literally out loud, but mentally talk to oneself, convince oneself that death is a reality. But what is death? What does death mean? Death means the loss of this body. It also means the loss of my connections here, the things that are dear to me, loss of those. So let me stop for a moment and say, why should we confront it? Because when it happens, we have to confront it. If we've confronted it before, then when it happens, we're ready for it. We know what's happening. We've thought it through. And when it happens, we are ready for it. And I've seen that many times with people who were very ill, and there was the hope of getting cured. And they fought as they should. They fought to get cured. They did everything that they could to get cured. They underwent treatment, operations, etc. But sometimes it's something that can't, eventually they find that the disease is getting the upper hand and there's no more hope. And so many times people who have been in that condition, they were so afraid of death before, they tried everything to survive. But by the time everything has been tried, they oftentimes are exhausted by the very process and say, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Now it's time to go. And so that means that they've had time to process the idea of dying, get used to the idea of dying, and now they're tired. Just like kids, I remember as a kid, and I'm sure all of you either remember it or have seen it in your own kids or others' kids. When I was so excited going someplace or being with friends or doing something exciting, and I didn't want to go to bed at all. I wanted to stay up. I wanted to stay up all night. And just in the excitement of being somewhere different or doing something different. But finally, a time comes when even a child gets so exhausted they just fall over and want to go to sleep. And then if you try to wake them up, they refuse to wake up. No, I'm going to sleep. And so we fight sometimes as children, even going to sleep, because we're afraid we're going to miss something. But eventually we find that no, now I really want to go to sleep. So with death, confronting it directly, realizing that this is something that's going to happen to all of us. As many thinkers have said, the one thing that all of us can be sure of from the moment we're born is that one day we're going to die. We may not know anything else about the trajectory of our lives, but we know that one day we will die, because that happens to everyone. So learn to confront the idea. It's helpful to, for instance, for those who have a somewhat scientific mind, as many people do with modern education, to read some of the books, but the scientific books, not all of the books, on near-death experiences. That is, the books that look at and study near-death experiences. There are people who claim to have had near-death experiences who just make up all sorts of stuff, because it's a big topic. Everybody wants to know what's on the other side. And so I can write a book and tell all kinds of things, make up all kinds of things, and sell a book, and everybody buys it because they want to know what's on the other side. So I don't mean read anything on near-death experiences, but those that are clinical studies of near-death experiences. Because there you find that people, and I have found, and people I know who have had that experience, that a person who has had that experience, they say that before I was terrified of death, but after this experience I have no fear of death, because I know that there's death only for the body, but that I survive. And so getting that faith. Another thing that can be done is the practice of meditation, because in meditation what we're trying to do is to isolate to the mind, not think about all kinds of things, to stop the rapid flow of consciousness, the stream of consciousness where thoughts are jumping from thing to thing, and to still the mind with just one thought, focus on one thing. And in that, we begin to internalize the mind. And by internalizing the mind, we begin to feel a peace inside. And that begins to give us the sense that there is something within me which is undisturbed by the outer world. And in time, that we begin to feel that now I see that even if the body dies and I lose my perception of the outer world, I don't go anywhere. But there is something blessed waiting for me. And so let me practice prayer, let me practice meditation, worship. All of that tends to internalize the mind and to direct the mind towards something which is deathless. And when we have that faith, then we're not afraid of death. So the two-prong approach is one, to confront the idea of death, just boldly confront it. Familiarize yourself with the idea and the fact that it's going to happen. The other is through prayer, meditation, spiritual practice, to begin to feel something which is not subject to death. And as for panicky thoughts and negative thoughts, the only cure for that really is to think of something, well, no, let me not say the only cure for that. One cure for that is to learn to focus on something positive. I don't mean falsely positive, like, oh, I'm going to the beach this summer, and so I'm going to think about going to the beach because that's something I love to do. Well, yeah, you might love to do it, but that's going to come and go. That's not going to be a solution for panicky thoughts. Every time a panicky thought comes, you can't think, well, I'm going to the beach this summer and it's going to disappear. No, but learn to think of higher thoughts. Learn to occupy your mind with higher thoughts. That's extremely important. Many of us are careful with what we put into our body as far as food, because we know that the food that we eat affects our health, and our health affects our sense of well-being. But we're not equally attentive to what we put into our minds. And so we should be careful with what we put into our minds. And we should put ennobling thoughts into the mind. Through our reading, through our thinking, through prayer and meditation and so forth, that we should make an effort. So don't think that negative thoughts are cured quickly by that. No, the spiritual solution takes time, but it is the real solution. to negative thoughts, is learning to think of other things. Another thing is, again, to have a meditation practice where you begin to just focus on one thing. Try to bring the mind to the here and now, calm it down, slow it down, and just to sit with one spiritual idea and let that go deep into your mind. Then that will also help a great deal in removing negative thoughts. Uh, Also analyze your mind and see how this, and obviously the questioner has done this because they realize that it's something they want to get out of, how it is that negative thoughts don't do you any good. They only do harm. There are many times when someone like me, that people come to for advice, where I can see that a person is stuck in a negative loop of thoughts, which is doing them no good. And all they need to do is to realize that I can't do anything about this. I don't need to take on this problem. It's not something that I have any power over. So let it go. But people can't let it go. So learn to analyze what's going on in the mind and realize, is there something, this is negative thoughts I have, is there something that I can do to cure the situation that's causing the negative thoughts? Or is it just negative thoughts that are producing more negative thoughts, and it's just a negative loop that I can't get out of, and it does me no good? Well, then find a way to pull the mind out. If you have initiation, you have a mantra, then whenever you find negative thoughts coming, then repeat your mantra. Or if you're devotional, you can think whenever you catch yourself in a negative loop of thinking, then pray, say, I offer all of my thoughts to you. I can't handle this. You please help me. You please accept them. I offer all of it at your feet. The other thing is to practice surrender to God. Again, if we're devotional. If you're following the path of knowledge, then that's a different matter. But if you have a devotional tendency, surrender to God. Then those are the ways in brief of handling panicky thoughts, negative thoughts, and fear of death. So now let me come to another. My question is, what is grace? Is grace in Vedanta the same as in other faiths? Is it related to karma? So yes to all of the questions, qualified yes to all of the questions. So first of all, what is grace? The idea of grace is that which is given, that which is not subject to law. So if I light the burner on a stove underneath a pot of water, the pot of water is going to get hot. That's not grace, that's a physical law. If I put my hand into a fire, it gets burned. That's because it's the law of causation, natural causation. I've gone against the laws of physics. And so there is law, the operation of causation, that you have you bring about a cause, and that cause brings out an effect. And that's according to the laws that were studied by science and the laws of psychology as well at the mental level, emotional level. But grace is that which comes outside the realm of causation. And that's why it's called grace. It's a free gift from the other side, not to sound psychic, I don't mean it in a psychic sense, but from the other side, meaning from the divine, from the transcendent. And so grace is that which is given by God, but even in Advaita, non-dualism, grace is present. Ramana Maharshi, the great Advaita teacher of Tiruvannamalai and Arunachalam, he always spoke from the standpoint of Advaita, non-dualism, self-knowledge, but he often speaks about grace. And the Katha Upanishad, which we've been studying in our Tuesday night class, which we're about to come to the end of, probably this coming Tuesday, in a couple of days, there it said, Yame Vaishya Vrinute Tena Labhyaha, whom the self chooses, to that one the self reveals itself. That is, even in the path of non-dualism, the revelation of the highest self comes as a matter of grace. Why? because the limited ego, the ego is limited. The ego is that which limits me, makes me think I'm an individual separate from everything else, and I have to protect myself, and I have to promote myself, and I have to sustain myself in opposition to everything outside of me. So the ego is that which causes my sense of individuality, my sense of limitation as an individual, separate from the rest of the universe. The limited ego, the ego is by nature limited. The limited ego cannot attain to the unlimited. The limited cannot bring about the revelation of the unlimited. What the ego can do is spiritual practice to purify itself, to make itself more transparent. But when spiritual experience comes, it comes as a revelation. No one thinks after the experience of illumination that, oh, I did this. I did this. This was my effort. No, everyone feels amazed that something infinite has been revealed to them. So whether one follows the path of devotion, where of course the idea of grace is present, where through our prayer and worship of God, we feel that at the highest level, we feel that God has granted himself, herself, itself to us, revealed the divine being to us as a gift, not because of our effort, but as a gift of love. That is the experience of grace. But even in minor ways, sometimes we are in a bind and we see no way out. We see no way to get out of the situation we're in, and yet we're desperate to get out. And we pray and pray and pray, and suddenly we find, and I'm speaking in metaphor, not literally, but we feel that suddenly a door has opened in the universe, and all we have to do is to walk through. And that also we experience as grace. Before, where there was a solid brick wall in front of us, there was no way out of our situation. Through prayer and worship, suddenly a time comes where we realize that no, the wall has broken down, I just have to walk out. And without effort, we're free of the situation which it seems so impossible to get ourselves out of. So there are many experiences of grace like that as well. There are various ways in which grace can be experienced. So is it the same as in other faiths? Well, in Christianity, for instance, there are many theological explanations of grace which are not the same as the Vedantic explanation of grace, but the experience is the same. So the experience of grace, with this exception, that in Christianity, for instance, grace is experienced usually as coming through Christ or through Mary for non-Protestants, or through the saints, etc., for Catholics and Orthodox, or through God, but all within a Christian context. So expanding that beyond the context, just the experience is the same, except that we would say it doesn't come just through the church, just through Christ, just through Mary, just through the saints, Christian saints, etc. But the experience itself is the same. And is it related to karma? Yes. Karma is part of the causal law. And so karma is the law of karma, which means you do something, you get a result from it. And that's going to come no matter what. Whether you do something good, you do something bad. Anything that you do that has a moral component, good or bad, even very mildly moral, in very small ways also, it's going to have a karmic result. So that is causation. That's not grace. But through grace, the burden of karma can be removed. As Swami Brahmananda used to say, you may have a mountain-high pile of cotton, which looks insurmountable. But one spark and the whole thing is burnt to ash. And so that is grace. So grace is that which makes the impossible possible, which breaks the bondage of karma, which, and as Holy Mother said, karma must be experienced, but if you were to lose a limb because of past karma in this life or a previous lifetime, through devotion and prayer and so forth, it may be that you only experience a scratch on your arm rather than losing. So the karma was to lose an arm. That's the causation part. But grace can make it so that it's easily sufferable, easily experienced and passed beyond. So now the next question is, um, and this is from a retreat I gave in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. During your teachings last week, you mentioned that Vivekananda says that it is only wisdom or knowledge that cuts the root of ignorance in oneself, without which enlightenment is not possible. So what I said in the retreat, I was speaking about the karma yoga in the Gita, and I said that Swami Vivekananda said that through karma yoga also one could attain to liberation. But Swamiji admitted that just unattached work itself is not enough, that knowledge is necessary, the knowledge that I am one with God. Tattvamasi, thou art that, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That knowledge is necessary to come. Just the purification of the mind that comes through karma yoga is not in itself enough. But Swamiji believed that through karma yoga, the mind could become so pure that just by hearing the truth, one could attain to enlightenment. But knowledge was necessary. So then the question goes on. However, in ordinary life, and especially in the world today, where money and materiality have taken over everything else, I see that in the entire lifetime goes away in these pursuits, and not even a spark of inquiry into why we are here and where we are going comes up in one's mind, let alone deep concepts about Brahma Vidya. In such a scenario, how is it possible to open one's mind to see past mundane issues that the society drills into us and tap into the nectar of knowledge that liberates? If one is content with ordinary goals and achievements, how would their mind open up to this real knowledge? So yes, that's something we can all identify with, that society is constantly drilling into us that this is real, this is what's desirable, the ego has to be developed, you have to promote yourself, you have to sell yourself, you have to become a success that you have to grab because nobody's going to give you anything. So you have to grab that which is yours. You have to grab life and enjoy it to the full. You have to be high on life and so forth. So all of the messages that we get from society are contrary to the spiritual message. So how, in the midst of all of that, are we to proceed? So yes, what society does tell us, all of that in spiritual life, we need to learn to protect ourselves from it. We can't not hear it. We can't not see it. You just drive down the street. It's on all the billboards. It's in every magazine. It's in every newspaper. It's on YouTube. It's on the television. It's in society. It's at parties. It's at work. So it's everywhere. But we have to learn to take responsibility for our own minds and begin to put in the contrary thought and to learn to protect our minds from the messaging of society. We don't have to do that by crawling into a cave and closing the door and not allowing any message come in. No, we have to, most of us have to live, even swamis have to live in society. So we have to learn how in the midst of that messaging to ignore it. And we learn to do that by putting a higher message into the mind enough times that we begin to get it. We begin to see that these things that society is telling me I need, that I need to do, the way that I need to act to be happy, the things I need to get to be happy, that's all false messaging. So we learn that by seeing beyond the messaging and seeing that there's something that is far better than anything society promises us. Just by looking around, look at the idols of society, the movie stars, the billionaires and people like that, and you see that their lives are a mess. Some of them are good people. Yes, some of them are good people. Some of them are very good people. But they haven't solved the problems of life. Even the good people, their lives are a mess. It's just that they're good people in the midst of a messy situation like other good people. But most of them, their lives are just a mess. and you can't say much more for them than that. Nothing that you would want to be. There's that famous quip of some humorist that people say that you can't be, that $1 million can't make you happy. Of course, nowadays $1 million isn't enough, so $100 million can't make you happy. Well, give me a chance to try it. Give me a chance to try it. So the idea that, well, if I had $100 million, I could make myself happy. Well, no, you couldn't. So many studies have shown that most people who win the lottery, it ruins their lives. It actually ruins their lives. There have been very few people who have been benefited by winning the lottery. Most people, their lives are ruined by it. And so, by seeing that, by seeing the condition of society, by looking at the condition of people, we begin to understand that no, the messaging of society is completely false. It's not the truth, and I need to counter it. So by learning to fix our mind on a higher goal and then to begin to practice, doing whatever spiritual practice we can, reading something spiritual every day, praying, spending some time in meditation, quiet reflection, etc., then in that way we gradually begin to counteract the message of society. The other way is through aging gracefully. And I don't mean gracefully in the sense of physical appearance, that had nothing to do with that. But aging gracefully, just when we get older, so many things that used to matter to us don't matter at all. We say, why in the world did I spend so much energy on that? It's just completely useless. It makes no difference. It doesn't help anybody. Why would I have spent so many years just struggling for that? There's no sense to it. And so just aging itself, if we allow it, brings us greater wisdom, because we begin to realize that no, there's not that much to be had here. So in the West, we're constantly, well, not now everywhere, not just in the West, it happens now, unfortunately, in India too, and other traditional societies. We're told that as you age, you have to fight age, you have to be young in spirit and all of that. Oh yes, we don't need to get old and grumpy, but we don't at the same time need to pretend like we're young people and run around as we're young people. And I used to see this a bumper sticker in California a lot in the days in the 80s and 90s when bumper stickers were 70s, 80s and 90s when bumper stickers were much more popular than they are now. In fact, as I've said before, I used to give whole lectures in San Diego on bumper stickers I'd seen that week. And so one of them was Foxy Grandma. And so I'm a foxy grandma. Oh, who wants to be a foxy grandma? A sweet grandma is much better than any foxy grandma. Happier, and people love her much more than a foxy grandma. No, there's no benefit to being a foxy grandma. Just be a grandma, be a grandpa. And so whether we're young or whether we're old, learning to fix our ideal on something which is real, something which is valuable, something that really has the potential to give us joy, great inner joy and great inner satisfaction. So let me take one question from the present internet audience. I've taken up all of the time with these questions, but I had one more question here, but I answered it by email to the questioner from California. So let's see. Okay, then let me take this. Can African Americans practice Hinduism? So that's a very good question and an extremely easy question, and that is yes in all bold letters. We've had African Americans who were president of our Vedanta societies when I was in the Chicago Center. We had a number of African American members of the Vedanta Society in those days. This was back in the late 60s and early 70s when I was there. But even afterwards, we had a wonderful devotee, Jim Harrison, who was president of the Vedanta Society, Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago. And after him, his wife, Octavia Harrison, was the president. We had a prominent trustee of our Vedanta Society of Sacramento in Carmichael, California, who was African American, who was a fireman and a prominent member of the Vedanta Society. We have in Dallas, we have in a number of our centers. Certainly, they can practice Vedanta. So Swami Vivekananda wanted that Vedanta be taught to the world, not in a missionary spirit that we got to go out into the street and turn people into Vedantans. We have to increase our numbers and we have to conquer the world with Vedanta. No. But he wanted the teachings accessible to people so that anyone, anywhere who found help in those teachings or found interest in them or found potential in them could take them up. And he wanted the teachings to be taught as principles so that everyone, everywhere in the world, within their own culture, could follow the principles of Vedanta. He didn't want that Vedanta be taught as Indian culture. He had the greatest love for India and for Indian culture. That was his own, and that which he loved with the full depths of his heart. But he realized that the great harm that missionary religions, especially Christianity and Islam, the two prominent missionary religions, the great harm that they had done to the world was that one tried to spread European culture around the world, and the other tried to spread Arabic culture around the world, and had done great harm to cultures around the world by wiping out their distinctiveness and the collective wisdom of those cultures by saying that whatever you've done before is wrong, you have to do everything our way. So neither Islam nor Christianity needed to do that, but they did. And so Swami Vivekananda did not want Vedanta to make the same mistake of enforcing Indian culture on other cultures. He wanted the principles of Vedanta taught in the Upanishads and later texts to be taught so that people in any cultural setting and with any cultural background could take those principles and express them in their own cultural forms. For instance, the analogy I often use is modern science. Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, discovered the modern expression of the law of gravity. The principle was understood in ancient India, but the modern mathematical expression of that law was discovered by Sir Isaac Newton in England. But that doesn't make gravity an English affair. So it's not that everyone who wants to follow the law of gravity has to do it in an English way. No, the law of gravity is a universal law. It's the way the universe works. And so Swamiji saw that Vedanta was that type of religion, which teaches the principles of the nature of the universe, the nature of existence, the nature of consciousness, the nature of our phenomenal being, the nature of physical reality, mental reality, and spiritual reality. And that those laws are universal because they are the discovery of the way that things are and work, not based on cultural expressions. And so those principles can be learned and expressed anywhere. So a person who is African American or Mexican American or Anglo American or whatever, with their cultural pride and cultural expression, they can be fully African American and fully Vedantin, fully Mexican American and fully Vedantin, because Vedanta is not about culture. It's about the nature of reality and expressing the beauty of those discoveries in your own cultural way. And just as an example, John Coltrane, the great jazz musician, one of the greatest of the jazz musicians, he discovered Vedanta. And in fact, one of my friends was the one who first took him to the Vedanta Society in Hollywood. His wife, who survived him, I'm not sure if she's still alive, but I haven't heard of her passing away. She has become a sannyasini and a yoga teacher and a Vedanta sannyasini, not of our order, an independent sannyasini, but she is a sannyasini and a yoga teacher. And you can't get much more culturally African American than John Coltrane. So yes, it's quite possible, and for any people from any other cultural background. So time is already up, so I'm sorry for the other questions. I'll read out the questions just to honor them. In Swami Vijnanananda, he mentions Ramakrishna said that God with form, without form, and even beyond form is true. Can you please elaborate what was meant when God is beyond even formless? Well, that I can answer in just a few words. Formless as we conceive of it is one thing, but the reality is beyond that. When we think of formlessness, we think of something like the endless ocean or the endless sky or open space with nothing in it. That's what we think of as formless. And so God can be perceived that way, or in a form like Kali or Krishna or Jesus or Ramakrishna. But the reality of God is beyond both the concept of form and the concept of formlessness. What God is in reality can't be said. Even formlessness does not express it. So, do you have advice on dealing with negative emotions arising due to political convictions? In my case, I find that these are strongly related to my convictions of the best way to help society at large. Yes, very good question, and a very pertinent question today, where many people have a lot of anxiety and negative emotions about the political situation on in whatever side of things one is on. So the best way to confront that is to know that I can't change the world, that there are dynamic forces behind the world and its functioning, not just the universe, but human society, American society, Indian society, etc. Huge forces that are at work that are beyond our control, beyond the control of political leaders. People run for election for administrative head of a country and promise all kinds of things, but they're not really in control. There are all kinds of forces that are working either to support what they're doing or to counter what they're doing, no matter what they try to do. And so the world is a huge thing with dynamic forces. From the higher perspective, we see that everything is the working out of individual and world and group karma. And so we can't do much to fight that. What we should do is to struggle for the good, promote the good, help and support the good, but to realize that success and failure are not in our hands. That's the great teaching of the Gita, one of the great teachings of the Gita. Again and again, Sri Krishna says, Labha labho, jaya jayo. Whether the same in acquisition and in loss, the same in conquest and in defeat, the same in success and in failure. So to realize that what I can do is within my sphere to try to do the right thing, to try to do the good thing, to try to help where I can help, to try to promote that. But I don't have control of the whole world, and nobody can, and it does have. The greatest tyrants in the world were those who thought that they knew what the world needed and they were going to force it on everybody. And they ended up doing great harm. And so do good where you can. Support the good, help the good, but realize that the world is this huge cauldron of gigantic forces where no one person or group of people actually have control. There's much more going on beyond the scenes than we can see. Swami Vivekananda came and Sri Ramakrishna came. They took birth and lived for the sake of changing the direction of society. But even they realized that that would take centuries before the work that they put in at the spiritual level, before that would begin to correct the ship of time. And so if even they found it impossible to take birth and just change everything with a snap of the fingers, then what can we do? So with that, I'll stop and give announcements and then closing prayer. So for announcements, on Tuesday we will have the Katha Upanishad class, and this almost surely be the last of the Katha Upanishad classes. After that, I plan to take up the Mundaka Upanishad. And but Tuesday it will be the Katha, and on Thursday we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. So the Tuesday class at 7:30 p.m., the Gospel class at 11 a.m., both of them live streamed. And next Sunday, I have not yet announced the topics for December, which means I haven't thought of them. Otherwise, I could announce them now if I thought of them, but I don't have anything to announce. So that is that. So let me give a closing chant, and then for those who are here, present here, who have the time to do so, and inclination, you can stay for oddity. Om madhuvatartayate madhuksharanti sindhavaha madhvirnasantoshadhihi madhunaktamutoshasi madhumatparthivagum rajaha madhudyaurastu nah pita Madhumando vanaspatir madhumagumastu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantunaha Om Madhu Om Madhu Om Madhu. For us who seek the truth, and for all living beings, may the winds blow sweetly. May the rivers flow sweetly. May the herbs yield us sweetness. Sweet be the night and the break of day. Sweet be the very dust of the earth. May the heavens pour down sweetness upon us. May the trees, lords of the forest, bear us sweetness. May the sun shed its sweetness upon us. May all the directions pour forth sweetness. Om, sweetness, sweetness, sweetness.